Hey everybody, Tim here, back for another update on the Chicago Northwestern Harvard subdivision. First, a happy new year to everyone watching. This is the first update of the layout in 2023, and I'm also happy because it's only been about 4 weeks since the last video, definitely a lot shorter than the 4 months gap between the previous two videos. I think this is the pace I'd like to keep up. These videos do a good job of forcing me to keep working on the layout, but not so quickly that it takes away, time from other things I want to do. So look for a video about every 4 weeks or so. I also want to give a big shout out to everyone that's commenting, liking, and subscribing. I've got almost 250 subscribers now, which is super cool. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. My original to do list from last episode to now was very different than what I actually ended up doing. We've had some pretty wild weather, which a lot of people have as well, that's forced me to call some audibles. I originally wanted to build the fourth and final scenic section of the layout, get the fascia up, and maybe even do some backdrop work. But first, we got hit by that cold wave in December, and we hadn't seen the sun for several weeks. So then my backyard was a swamp, and I can't get to my shed where the materials are currently. So at the same time, I also got some building kits and modeling supplies for Christmas, so I decided that instead it was time to work on some scenery. And a brief reminder to those that are new to the channel, this is essentially a beta tested version of my layout. I don't have the space for a permanent layout in my current house, but we are planning on moving in 1.5 to 2 years. So I figured this would be the ideal time to really put serious effort into an initial version of the layout to build up my skills. So that way, when I do have the space, I can feel good about my ability to put together a top quality layout. So because of that, I'm not going to make this a totally faithful recreation of Harvard yet, because again, this is a short-lived layout. I want it to be Harvard-like, but I'm going to mostly build kits out of the box and focus on working on painting and weathering and building up those other skills first. One of the kits I got was Walther's modern suburban station, which is close enough in size to the Harvard station, and it'll certainly serve its purpose here. And it's a good starting point for the scenery because it'll basically let me start with the southernmost scenery or the farthest to the right scenery on the layout, and then work my way north or to the left. Right next to the station on the other side will be a view block, but I'll talk more about that later. So I started by laying down cork sheets above the four tracks just to make sure that the height was consistent for the station and the parking lot. And then I laid out 1 millimeter styrene sheets for the parking lot and the base of the building and the platforms. And because the built-in sidewalk in the kit is 1 millimeter tall, it worked well then. So on top of that initial layer of 1 millimeter styrene, then I could put the station and then another strip of 1 millimeter styrene to serve as the station platform itself. The height isn't completely perfect. That basically those two levels of styrene make the platform level with the rails, which is a little too short. If you see this picture here, you can see that the platform is slightly raised above the rails in real life. But the challenge with N scale at at a 1 to 160 scale is that getting into that kind of nuance of height is tricky. In the future, what I might do is raise the whole base, like I might use 2 millimeter styrene to help raise everything a little bit higher. But a good lesson learned and a good reminder of why, again, this is kind of the beta tested version of the layout. The windows and doors on this kit are separate pieces from the walls, so I took advantage of that and I airbrushed the parts separately to make it easier to paint. I decided to base my paint scheme off of the image on the box, which worked out pretty well. I did a quick test fit to see what it would look like on the layout, and I'm excited, but it definitely is going to need more details to really make the space come alive and really feel, realistic. One thing I knew I wanted to fix was to do some internal work inside the building. If I were to try and get down to track level and take pictures or video, you'd see right through the building. It would look like a new construction, where you can just see from window to window and there's nothing in the middle. So I wanted to add a room that faced the track side to deal with that. Now the Walters station, the sprues are hybrid, meaning Walters reuses these sprues for both their station kit but also their modern gas station kit. So there were some extra wall materials left over that you don't use for the passenger station, but you do use for the gas kit. So I took those and I did some cutting to create two properly sized walls. One of them with a frame and some doors, and the other with kind of a ticket window. So the idea is that if you were to look in from trackside, you would see a waiting room. I'm not interested at this point in working on rooms that face the other side because, especially once I get the backdrop, I'm just not going to be taking pictures from that angle. So I did a test fit of the parts to make sure that they would line up with where the exterior windows are. And now you can see that during the day, you're not really going to be able to tell what's in there, but it's still serving its purpose because it's not a hollow building anymore. But I'm also doing this because I'd like to add lighting to the layout. On the real Harvard sub, and this will be true in mine as well, a lot of the freight movement happens at night. In the real world, it's to avoid competing with the commuter Metra trains, which would obviously still be true for mine. But then it's doubly true because they would want to keep the interior high-speed tracks clear for the intercity passenger service. Once I got done with that test fit, I got to work on the parking lot. I used AK Interactive's asphalt texture paint, which I really liked. It does come out looking like very fresh asphalt, though, so you need to weather it. I tried out a few different ideas, but ultimately I found that if you just lightly sand it, that worked best because then what you sand off kind of almost serves as a weathering powder, and then I would use a little water to help then diminish that. And it didn't work perfectly, but it worked well enough. So then it came time to paint the parking lines. I taped off the areas and just sprayed with a couple of passes of Vallejo Air White. I definitely learned a lot of lessons in taping off. This is really my first time taping off this kind of a space, and I 100% know what I would do differently next time. The biggest thing is doing better in making sure that the tape is firmly down onto the surfaces so paint doesn't bleed under the tape. I definitely had some fuzzy lines that came out that I had to patch with some hand brushing later on. I then went through and painted off the spaces next to the handicap parking spots for van access just because they have the diagonal stripes in real life to mark those van access spaces. I'm going to try and see if I can find like a stencil online or something to help me with the actual handicaps parking space paint because that's obviously more complex. I don't taping that off isn't really going to work. Uh, After I went through and then fixed that overspray that I mentioned and waited for it to dry, I did a matte coat over this as well because this surface was obviously going to see some wear and tear. I then went and back and did some more work on the interior of the station. I tried out Luke Towan's guide to making your own signs. I put a link in the description. He uses HO scale, where it's definitely easier to do this and other scenery techniques, but it was still able to make it work for signs of some size. You can see my ones that I tested here. I printed off on photo paper the 400 poster I showed you at the end of last video. And then also the station kit came with a little ticket machine. And Metra, for the most part, doesn't have those, but they do have those on the electrified route. So I found a picture of what one of those machines looks like. I printed it off as well so I could glue on to the front of the ticket machine. You can see there's a third poster there. I didn't end up using this. It's a fare evasion sign that Metra has just because it printed off, it was way too large. It was almost the floor to ceiling, which is not even close to what those signs would be in terms of size in real life. But after painting the interior walls and putting on the poster in the ticket machine, I felt it was a good start. There's still more details I want to get that I need to order. I also threw a clear strip for the windows, and then I glued down a picture of blinds to cover most of it to complete that wall. And you can see with the interior walls and the floor glued down that the scene is starting to really show some life. The roof looked a little too flat and toyish in my opinion, so I used my Tamiya weathering powders to age the HVAC units and grimy up the roof a little bit. I'm not completely happy with how the roof looked. I felt it was a little bit inconsistent, a little heavy and a little light in some spaces, but again, for what I'm hoping this will be, it certainly gets the job done. I did not glue the roof down yet though because I want to go back, like I said, and work on that interior lighting. And until those lighting kits come, I want to keep this unglued. So it was time to take the tape off then to make sure the track was still in good shape and to get ready for the next steps. So Wheels of Time put out the ADA required the warning striping for platforms as a decal that I laid down on the platform, and just that one bit of color already added quite a bit to the scene. I do need to order some more though. I had enough to cover the main platform, but not the opposite platform, only part of it. But after that, I briefly recovered the tracks then to work on that opposite platform. The actual platform in Harvard here is part asphalt and part concrete, which I thought was kind of weird. So I wanted to be true to that. So I kept And on this one, I kept the asphalt much more to the original black because, again, in the pictures, it looks like a much more fresh asphalt, which makes sense. A lot less wear and tear when it's just foot traffic versus vehicle traffic. And while that was settling, I started ballasting. I made sure to use eyedroppers for both the isopropyl alcohol and then the watered down Mod Podge glue that I use, because with the weather, with the scenery so close to either side of the tracks where I'm ballasting, I wanted to make sure, inevitably ballast is going to get where you don't want it to, and I want to be able to shot back that up off of all the detail work that I just did. So I made sure that the glue was only going onto the track spaces. And then while the ballast was drying, I took a picture of the real Harvard station sign from Google Street View, and then I quickly made 3 signs and printed them out and then put them on the station. And again, just adding a little bit of blue helped quite a bit, in my opinion, with how everything is looking around the station. So I had to pause working on the scenery on this section of the layout. Notice there's nothing beyond that opposite platform, and that's because I want to use Walthers has a kit coming out with a couple of yard structures that look very similar to what is present in the real yard at Harvard. I mentioned that, and I showed a picture in a previous video, but they keep pushing back its release, and I don't want to guess on what those building profiles will be. I want to actually physically have them on hand before I map everything else out. So I'm pausing on this, but this is a good chance for me to work on the scenery on the east side or the back side of the other section that already has some scenery done, since that scenery is a continuation of the area around the metro station. So in real life, there is a common entrance for the Metra passengers and the employee lot. You'll notice I have a lot of empty black space right now in the parking lot. That's because I'm not done detailing yet. I want to make sure, to be able to put in some islands with, greenery. I want to be able to put in some street lights. And I want to make sure that I have the proper space to do all those things in addition to the parking spaces. So the other 2x4 section then that already has the grass and stuff on the area in front of the tracks, that's going to have the employee lot, which sits just to the north of the station. Now, behind that lot in real life is a single long um, 1-story structure. On my layout, because I was given these, I'm going to utilize some of the Walthers Merchant Row kits that I received to serve kind of that same purpose. The backs of the buildings are going to be facing the tracks just like they are in real life, so I'll paint up the sides and the back, but I won't have to worry about detailing the fronts, which is kind of nice. It'll save me some time. I laid down cork sheets to keep this level with both the track and the station and parking lot. I again used 1 millimeter styrene to make sure that the parking lot would be level. I wouldn't have the buildings, be flush with the edge of this 2x4 section because I wanted a 2-inch gap for pavement to represent the access drive into the employee lot. And I didn't want a gap between the two kits. I wanted to keep it similar to the continuous wall in real life Harvard. So I'm going to use a little bit of styrene to close the gap between the two kits. Um, the rest is pretty similar to what I already broke down for this station. I chose to do kind of a darker brick color, and then I just did a gray wash to do the mortar. Um, and then after I put that together, which I'm not done yet because again I want to wait to put the roof on because I want to be able to do lighting. And then with the parking lot, again, pretty much the same stuff. The only difference is the striping on the lot is yellow instead of white, just like the real lot. So this is in what I would call a good enough state. I do want to go back and again, at the very least, I want to do some lighting inside this background structure. I think it would be cool to have um, some of the windows to have light coming through it. So for some of them, I'll do plastic or styrene painted black to kind of do view blockers. I'll do some printouts of blinds and other barriers. But again, with some of the traffic happening late at night, I wanted to be able to have there be some dynamism to that scene should I try and model what nighttime activity is going to be looking like. But again, I feel pretty good about the scenery work as I was able to do. I feel like that's really solid progress from where we were last time, especially since even though it's been 4 weeks since the video, the lead up to Christmas was pretty busy for me. So this was all done I started doing all this about the day or two after Christmas. So I feel really good about the progress I was able to make in only about a couple weeks. I did also acquire a few more pieces to run on the layout. I picked up another AC 4400, which is the AC version of the Dash 9, number 8806. I have one more unit to come in. I'll talk about that in a minute, but this will likely be it though for my freight locomotives. I would like to get an old GP or maybe an old like SD42 to run the local, but that's not a high priority item that I want to get right now. I do want to finish off this update by going over the timeline of events. Because remember, the premise of this layout is that the Chicago Northwestern acquired the Milwaukee Road back in 1964, which gave it the financial strength to build into the Powder River Basin by itself without Union Pacific, which then gave it sufficient strength to survive as an independent line into the modern day. So this layout is set 10 years in the past. That gives me time to figure out how I would want to modify the actual events that occurred, and also that gives companies time to build kits for locomotives and rolling stock that I would want. But what that means is, in layout terms, although 2022 just ended for us, as far as the layout is concerned, the year 2012 just got done. So I'm probably going to put like a Google Doc or a web page together to help keep track of it all, so that way you can look through it too. But here are all the major things that happened in 2012. Just like in real life, the next tier of EPA emission standards went into effect in 2012. And in the summer, the ET44, which is the latest in the GEVO line of locomotives, was released. I have a Scale Trains ET44 that's shipping right now. In fact, they just emailed us earlier this week that the pre-orders were available, so I'm just waiting for that to get to my house. Obviously, I'll have to custom paint that once it gets here, but in the layouts timeline, the Chicago Northwestern orders does an initial order of about 50 ET44s to help modernize the fleet, but there will only be one ET44 that we'll see on the Harvard sub because, again, this is a low-profile freight line, right? And this is, again, true in real life, too, that you have only a handful of freights that come through a day. Because of that, they're going to largely relegate the Dash 9s and the AC 4400s to handle the bulk of the activity on this line, which not only makes sense from like a realism standpoint, but also for practical reasons because it's much cheaper to buy factory painted units and just weather them heavily. And the Dash 9s are the most recent Northwestern locomotives that are made by companies. The big news in 2012 is that the inaugural run of the 400 happened. Now, the restoration of the 400 line is a multi year, multi phase project. The line was in no shape to handle passenger traffic, let alone high speed passenger traffic, when the project was announced in 2009. But by 2012, the work had been done all the way up to Madison. The state of Wisconsin, which was paying for most of the capital improvements of the line, pressures the Northwestern to start running the route up to their capital, even if they can't get close to the Twin Cities yet. So on August 6, 2012, a consist of 5 refurbished Amfleet cars led by a P42 made the inaugural run of Train 401 from Chicago up to Madison. With a top cruising speed of 110 miles an hour, from Crystal Lake to Janesville and then Janesville to Madison, it completed the journey in just under 2 hours. Even with stops, the train was almost 30 minutes faster than if someone had driven from Chicago to Madison, which was a critical benchmark, to help really build excitement about using this as a viable transportation option. Getting the tracks north of Madison ready will be a much longer venture for reasons we'll get into in a later episode. So the Northwestern has set a target of Q1 2014 for when the 400 will make its complete run from Chicago to the Twin Cities. But regardless, the project is off the ground and they have regular trains, multiple trains running every day from Chicago up to Madison. So that's what's happened in the story of the layout in 2012. Next video, I'm hoping to make more scenery progress. I have several factory kits I want to start assembling to represent the Star Line. And weather permitting, we'll see if we can get that other 2x4 section built as well. Regardless, I feel like I've made really good progress in the last couple of weeks. And if you liked what you saw, please like the video and hit that subscribe button as well. And make sure to tune in next time for the February update. Thanks.